Welcome back, everybody. It is the Dynasty Fantasy Football Podcast on Fantasy Pros. I'm your host, Scott Bogman. Follow me on the Twitter at Bogman Sports. I'm joined, as always, by Pat Fitzmaurice. Follow him on the Twitter at Fitz_FF. And on the show today, we're going to be talking about the initial ECR and Dynasty rankings for running backs. We're going to go over our top 50. Fitz and I are going to, of course, have some fun disagreeing on some of the rankings on some players, as we always do, and kind of lay out how the industry and how so far the rankers are seeing the running back. So this should be an interesting show because I know I think running backs is where we have maybe our biggest differences in just overall philosophy fits.
Yeah, we are in sync with a lot of things, Boggs, but running back might be where we have the most differences of opinion. And and it's just you and me this time. No more Worm, but Worm is keeping tabs on this show because, he sent me a little note like, oh, so you're taking a vacation from Worm, eh? So he did hear the last episode. So Ryan Wormley back next week, but one more week without our friend Worm.
That's right. Our best friend, who we never disrespect while he's not here, will absolutely be returning to us next week. Look, we miss Worm, of course. We bust his chops a little bit here, but we love Worm. We want him to come back, even though he is a Dirty Rapids fan. That's fine. It's okay. We still want him to come back. It's okay. Just so you guys know, all of these rankings can be found at fantasypros.com/rankings. There's also, there's a tab for Dynasty. There's a tab for ECR, PPR, half PPR, standard, IDP. There's all kinds of rankings over at Fantasy Pros, so you can easily follow along on these. But let's just dive in here and start with the first tier, the top tier here, Fitzy, and it's only 4 names. I kind of disagree with it only being 4 names. I put a 5th one in here, but the 4 names that we have to start are Bijan Robinson at 1, Breece Hall at 2, Jahmyr Gibbs at 3, and Christian McCaffrey at 4. I will say this, Fitz is in sync with all of these players in terms of ECR, 1, 2, 3, 4. For me, I have Jonathan Taylor at 4, I have CMC at 3, and I have Gibbs at 5. So I'm just a little bit different, but I would put JT in this tier. I understand him not being in here because of the injury issues last season, and I get it. Have a couple injuries, you're a running back, people get scared. I completely understand. So I understand. Do you agree with it? Because you are an ECR and you do have Taylor 5. Would you put Taylor in this group, or would you still have him in the second tier?
I agree with you that Taylor should be in tier 1, Boggs.
Okay.
And really our only point of disagreement on tier 1, I think, our only real point, I mean, you have Jahmyr Gibbs at 5. I have him at 3. And I don't know, maybe you have some of the same issues that I have with him in redraft. Like in redraft, he's getting picked around that first round, second round turn. And when we saw David Montgomery come back from injury last year and the usage sort of normalized for those 2 backs, Montgomery was getting like 15 carries a game down the stretch. Jahmyr Gibbs from like week 10 on, and including the Lions playoff games, averaged 11.3 carries a game and 2.7 catches a game. It's 11.3 carries, 14 touches. Like that's not the sort of workload you want. And like, yes, he's explosive and has the juice to make the smaller workload work, but we want to see a heavier workload for him. Maybe he gets it eventually, but that's a problem in the here and now for Jahmyr Gibbs.
Yeah, and it's not even that I have an issue with Jahmyr Gibbs. I would absolutely have him, even though he is 5th to me. I would still have him in that top tier, and that's why I said it's 5 names deep. I'd put him in there. The positives that we have going into the season for Gibbs is that the Lions have already said they have to give him the ball more. So I expect it to go just straight up more to him and less to Montgomery, right? So that is an initial thing, which is why people are ranking him so high. But also, you can't keep players that are so good off the field, even if the guy behind them is still pretty good. If they're not as good, that's why Christian McCaffrey, every coach that has ever played Christian McCaffrey has said, we're going to get him fewer touches. He needs fewer touches. And then they don't do it. Why? because he's so much more talented than anybody else on the team. He has to be out there. And I think that's what we're eventually going to see with Jahmyr Gibbs. I just don't know if it's immediate. And I don't know. I think Dan Campbell has been one of the more true to his word type of coaches, right? If he says it in a press conference, it's usually not out of nowhere. It's usually what he's thinking about. He's not making stuff up. He's not telling the media what they want to hear all the time. He's telling them what he wants them to hear. So I do trust him a little bit more. So I still like Gibbs. I feel like I like him more than I do based on where I have him ranked, right?
Yeah.
I feel like I'm higher on him, and I can guarantee you in the overall, I'm for sure higher than you on Gibbs because I'm just higher on running backs in general. So easy peasy. Top 4 in the first tier. We go down to tier 2 here, and it does start with Taylor. And then we have Travis Etienne coming in at 6. You and I are both lower on him. I have him at 10. You have him at 8. Devon Achane is in here at 7. I have him at 8. You have him at 6. That's kind of our first bigger disagreement, even though, you know, we're 2 spots away. I'm lower, you're higher than consensus. And we're both actually lower on Saquon because he comes in at 8 and we both have him at 9. So, Fitzy, let's just start out with Taylor is fine in here. We already talked about him. We kind of know Taylor. Etienne at 6. You and I are both lower. Do you think, is this too high, or do you understand why we are coming in low on Etienne?
I think I do understand why we're coming in low, Boggs. I mean, Etienne was averaging like 20 PPR points a game for about the first half of the season last year. And down the stretch, he averaged about 13 PPR points a game. There was a big, big drop off. And I realized some of those changes, like that drop off wasn't entirely related to Etienne himself. Like, I mean, like the Jags offensive line kind of went to hell, and like there were some other issues there. But man, and we've got Doug Peterson, who's a pretty straight shooter, constantly like unprovoked talking about the need to get Tank Bigsby more involved. Right. Like, I mean, it's granted, like when these guys get questions in press conferences and they're asked about like backups and everything, of course they like talk about the backups, and then the video of the press conference goes on Twitter and everyone's like, oh, I don't know if I should be drafting this starting running back for this team. Like, listen to this coach talk up the backups. Well, of course he's going to talk up the backups. Like they're almost contractually obligated to talk up everyone on the team. But Peterson like voluntarily talks about using Tank Bigsby more. And like I think
Peterson is the opposite of Campbell, Fitzy, where it's like, I believe everything Campbell says, but I don't know if I'm believing everything that Peterson says, because he said this last year about wanting to get Bigsby more touches, and then they didn't. So did he take a huge step this offseason? Because if he didn't, how were we getting him more touches?
Right. And that's it. Like, I don't know that Bigsby has done anything to earn those touches. Certainly not last year. But I don't know. It's less the coach speak that has me concerned than just, I don't know. To me, he's a good back, but he's not the sort of difference maker that I'm looking to proactively pursue.
Right. If he's your RB1, you're fine. But there are a glut of guys that you'd have over him, as do I. And we'll get into those guys more. I don't want to talk out of their spot for too many of these guys. Achane, you're 1 spot higher than ECR. I'm 1 spot lower. I don't think that this is really a big disagreement, because I think we're both Achane guys. And this is not an Aggie thing at all. I swear to God, it's not. So because I like Achane in Miami, I think he's a perfect fit. And the only down thing that you can say for him, and I know people have been saying Jaylen Wright. You and I have discussed this on this show before. I think that's more about Mostert eventually. Yep. I don't think it's about Achane, because Achane is limited in touches anyway. He's a 15 touch guy, and that is why he can't be in the top 6 to me. So I can't put him there. You do have him there. But I do wonder, is Achane a guy you're actively pursuing because you have him ranked a little bit higher than ECR, or you just have him higher, but if it's between him and a wide receiver, you're probably taking the wide out, right?
Yeah, probably. But I am kind of actively pursuing Achane, Boggs, because I think right now the waters are sort of muddy with Achane's usage, and people don't know how he's going to be used. He averaged, I believe, 11.8 touches a game last year. If you take out the game where he got hurt after about 4 snaps, it goes up to 12.8. And if you take out the first game, he missed week 1 with, I believe, a shoulder injury, and they were real light with his usage the second week. So if you take out those 2 games where he was either hurt in the game or used very sparingly, he was around 13 something touches a game. Not all that different from Jahmyr Gibbs, Boggs.
Yeah.
And so like he is going to need a tag team partner as a smaller back, a sub 190 pound guy. But man, like he's electric, Boggs.
And fewer touches means fewer hits, which means you can last longer too. Now, smaller frame might mean, more likely to have a major injury, but, I mean, you have to build that in a little bit in terms of his longevity.
Yeah, and he is special, and I'm not going to say that he is not going to be durable because he's smaller. Because Boggs, the guy I've always compared him to, ever since last year, is Warwick Dunn, a guy who like a small
epitome
back,
of staying healthy. Yeah,
who played for 12 years and was ultra durable. I mean, there was only 1 year, I think, the last year of Dunn's career where he did not have over 1,000 yards from scrimmage. Just basically indestructible for 11 seasons. So I'm not going to say that Achane is like some undue injury risk. And we know he's good, Boggs. I mean, the guy averaged 7.8 yards per carry. YPC is a garbage stat, of course. We know that. But when a guy averages 7.8 yards per carry over more than 100 carries, 103, I think we can conclude that he's a pretty talented dude.
Absolutely. And the breakaway yard percentage, the elusive rating, like everything is great for Achane. It's hard to ignore. Some people still choose to do it though. And this genuinely surprised me, Fitz, that not that I mean, I was surprised that I was low on Barkley, but I was surprised that I had the exact same ranking as you on Barkley, because I feel like I'm the guy defending him. You're the guy hating on him in most of our discussions here. And we ended up in the same spot. And I think the upside is still incredibly high for Saquon. We just saw DeAndre Swift have a top 10 season behind this Eagles line. It's not the same. Obviously, Kelsey's gone, but it's still very, very good. And, knowing the talent that Saquon has is way more than what Swift had. We could be in for an enormous season. So we might both be a little too low on Saquon. So I know you've spent some time hating, but tell us why we're still in on Barkley as an RB1.
So our rankings are the same, Boggs, but maybe our tiers are aligned a bit differently. Like maybe you see him as a legit tier 2 guy. I mean, I'd probably cut off tier 2 after Etienne and drop Barkley to tier 3.
Okay. I definitely have bigger tiers than you do for sure then.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess I feel good about Barkley going from the Giants to the Eagles, knowing he's going to have a better offensive line in front of him. But we don't know how many short yardage touchdowns he's going to get if the Eagles still insist on doing the tush push every time they're at the 2-yard line or closer. We don't know. I would
say you just paid Barkley. Don't make Jaylen do it.
You
Give
would think
Barkley the ball.
It's kind of the reason I'm fading Jaylen a little bit too this year. But the other thing is, Boggs, like Barkley hasn't really been good as a pass catcher since like 2018, 2019. It's been a while since he's been that electric talent in the receiving game that we saw at Penn State and early in his career with the Giants.
But I'll also say that the Giants have done just a terrible job of putting talent around him. So there's a lot of guys playing in the box anyway. So give him a little space in Philly. I think we see a different Saquon.
Yeah, he's had bad luck with health and he's had a lousy supporting cast. So got to give him the benefit of the doubt. Like the talent is pretty hard to question.
And that's why we're still in the same ranking. And I'm sure in the overall, once again, I probably have him higher. Before we get to tier 3, let me tell you guys about Reality Sports Online. And by now, most of you have already heard of Reality Sports Online, the powerful fantasy sports platform where owners get to build and manage their fantasy team like an NFL general manager. But the question is, have you tried it? It's time to see what all the buzz in the Dynasty community is about. Free agency, multi-year contracts. So rookie draft, multi-team trades, franchise tags, contract extensions, first-round rookie options, automated contracts and salary cap functionality, and much, much more. If you think it sounds complicated, it's not. The best thing about Reality Sports Online Fantasy Front Office is that it doesn't take any more time than a standard league. It just requires more strategy. Or if you think you are among the fantasy elite, this is the platform to test your mettle. If you're still not sure, you can test your general manager skills for free, FREE, in a mock free agency auction. If you like what you see, use a promo code FantasyPros to receive a 10% discount on your team or league today. That's promo code FantasyPros to receive a 10% discount on your team or league today. Fantasy just got real at realitysportsonline.com. Let's go to the third tier, Fitzy. It starts at number 9, who we are both higher on. I have him at 6, you have him at 7, in Kenneth Walker. Going to 10 is Kyren Williams. 11 is Rhamondre White. 12 is Isiah Pacheco. 13 is James Cook. 14 is Jonathan Brooks. And 15 is Josh Jacobs. There are 2 players that you and I are both higher than consensus on in this group. They are Kenneth Walker and, surprisingly, Josh Jacobs. And it's funny to me. Let's start with Josh Jacobs first, because I feel like in the episode that we talked with Joe on the flagship about Josh Jacobs, we were both kind of down on him in the overall. I had him at 13 for this year. I think you had him even lower than that for this season. But in Dynasty, you and I both have him higher than that, and still as a low-end RB1. I think a lot of that is trustability. We've seen Josh Jacobs do it before. We know he can handle a massive workload like he did in Vegas. So we know that the talent is in there. For this year, it's just questionable how they're going to use him, because they added it back. It's a new system, and LaFleur doesn't really give one guy all those touches. So let's start with Jacobs here first, and let me know your thoughts about him and why is he still a low-end RB1 to us.
I'm getting cold feet, Boggs. And the next time I do a revision of my Dynasty rankings, which is probably going to be pretty soon, I don't think I'm going to have Jacobs quite this high. I think I'll probably be a little more in line with ECR. And what's terrifying me, Boggs, is what you just mentioned about Matt LaFleur not really being a monogamous user of running backs. Right. And I can't stop thinking about is that in 2018, when Matt LaFleur was the Tennessee Titans offensive coordinator, he gave Dion Lewis 156 carries when he had Derrick Henry on that team. Dion Lewis had 60 fewer carries than Derrick Henry. He made Derrick Henry a committee back, Boggs.
But I'll say this, there is a learning process here. I don't think LaFleur would do that if you ask him again, especially knowing, how healthy Derrick Henry has been relatively in his career.
But Aaron Jones is miles better than A.J. Dillon, and he has been giving A.J. Dillon significant work. And now he drafted a guy who some of the sharpest minds in football, like Daniel Jeremiah and Derek Brown of Fantasy Pros, have dubbed their favorite running back in the class of 2024. So there's now a really talented back behind Josh Jacobs. And I just feel like Matt LaFleur is going to want to use him.
I mean, how much more do we need to say about Kenneth Walker between you and I? I have him at 6, you have him at 7. His ECR is 9, so we're both way ahead of ECR. I have said, on this show and many other shows, I think that Seattle, really what it boils down to is I don't like Geno. I think that he is overrated as a quarterback. He had the good comeback season. Last year wasn't that good. They have Sam Howell sitting behind him, who we saw was thrust into action too early last year. So to me, it seems like Seattle for this season, and most likely next season as well, probably going to be leaning on that run game because they have 2 good runners in Walker and Charbonnet. I feel like there's plenty of reasons, and people would maybe roll their eyes at us having Kenneth Walker this high because Grubbs comes over from Washington and they just went with the pass heavy system with the Huskies. And you have DK, JSN, Lockett here. So it looks like it all could line up to be the same type, but you don't have the same O-line. You definitely don't have the same quarterback. So I think Grubb and McDonald here, they're going to have to run the ball a bunch. So, and I think Kenneth Walker is one of the best runners in the game. So I love him. Anything else you want to add on to our love for Kenneth Walker here?
I've heard that concern. What if Grubb wants to throw a lot more? Well, it would be hard because I believe Seattle had the 6th highest pass rate in the NFL last year. So I don't know how much more you can throw than that. I'll add that in games where both Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet played last year, Zach Charbonnet averaged 7.4 touches a game. He was a strict backup. And why not Boggs? I mean, I've made this point, but like a lot of people 2 years ago or 3 years ago, whenever Kenneth Walker came into the league, same year as Breece Hall, a lot of people liked Walker as much as Breece Hall. And like, I don't necessarily think it's been proven that Breece Hall's vastly superior to, like, he's more versatile and does more in the passing game for sure. But no running back has forced more missed tackles than Kenneth Walker over the last 2 years. He's really, really good, Boggs. Yeah. And I would have him on tier 2. And I would kick Saquon off tier 2, and I would put Kenneth Walker on tier 2.
Yeah, like I said, my tier 2 is bigger, but I have him at 6. So he's immediately behind Jahmyr Gibbs to me. So I am all over Kenneth Walker. You and I have 2 guys below consensus in this tier as well. We're both lower on Pacheco, and we're both lower on Jonathan Brooks, which I know is going to raise some eyebrows for a lot of people here. We're only 2 spots lower on Pacheco. Again, Pacheco's a guy that I feel like I like more than than I do, obviously, compared to everybody else. But I am more than fine of getting Pacheco as, a high-end RB2. I just don't really want him as a 1, and that's where he's being ranked right now. So I don't know. I'm just a touch lower on Pacheco. You have anything to add on him?
I don't feel like I'm down on him. I mean, like maybe the thing I like least about him is I do worry that his Tasmanian devil running style is eventually going to get him hurt. Because he is fearless, man. I mean, he does run like a dude trying to run through a door. And but really, I mean, he's been really good. And what a find for the Chiefs in the 7th round. So nothing really bad to say about him. Like I think he's basically fairly valued in Dynasty for the most part.
And then Jonathan Brooks, I have him at 19, you have him at 15. His ECR is 14. So we're both just a little bit lower on him. And by the way, a report came out today where Dave Canales said that he might not be ready for the beginning of training camp. So it's already starting here. And my big thing with Brooks is that I think you're going to miss a big chunk of this season with him, because I think we always hear, and look, ACL injuries, a lot of guys have recovered from them quicker than they have in the past. But there's a difference between being fully recovered and being fully back. And I think Javonte Williams showed us that last year, right? Like all the reports where he's good, he's going to be good, he's going to be good. And then he wasn't. And then he had to go on IR for a little bit, came back, looked okay, but he did not look like the same guy that we saw before. I'm afraid of the Panthers, who are especially in need of weapons, potentially maybe rushing him back a little bit more. So I'm glad to hear that they're already handling him with kid gloves a little bit. So that's why I have him lower, and I'm significantly lower than you are as well. So I'm afraid of missing a big chunk of the season. And there's some guys that don't ever look the same when they come off a major injury like this. So
dear listeners, if Scott Bogman is pumping the brakes on a University of Texas running back, take heed. Maybe you should be pumping the brakes too. Yeah. I mean, it's hard to rank a rookie running back who's coming off a major knee injury. Like
right.
It's hard to figure out where to slot him. And I know you're not down. You like Jonathan Brooks.
I do. I love him.
Yeah. It's not as if you're down on the player. You're just maybe down on the year 1 outlook. I get it.
Yeah. And the value overall, I think is just a little bit too high on him right now. Anybody else? We got Kyren, James Cook, Rachaad White. Anything else to add on those guys here?
I just want to ask you about Kyren, Boggs. You're not at all worried about Corum to have him ranked. You've got him RB7. I have him RB10, and consensus is RB10 also.
Yeah, look, I do. I'm sure. I'll say I'm a little bit worried on Blake Corum coming in here, but I think Kyren is still the lead back for this year, and Stafford can retire at any point, and if he does, they're going to use both those running backs a lot because as we saw when Stafford went down, this is a different team without him. So I think they're going to have to run the ball a bunch in the near future. So maybe this year. Kyren takes a little bit of a dip, but moving forward, they're going to have to run the ball a bunch because I don't think Stafford's sticking around for too much longer. So I think it's like this year, maybe one other year. And at this point, at any point, the wheels could come off for Stafford. Great quarterback, Hall of Fame worthy for sure. But, Mother Nature's undefeated. So he's going to start slowing down at some point. And the passing game is amazing, right? Oh, it's Cooper, it's Nakua, it's great. But you put a different QB in, you're going to have to rely on the run game more. So I think both those guys could have a pretty good outlook moving forward. All right, let's jump down, Fitzy, to tier number 4, which is a bigger tier. We're going to start out at 16, where we have Trey Benson. You're at ECR. I'm at 20. DeAndre Swift is 17. You're lower. I'm way lower. I got him in the 30s. Javonte Williams is at 18. You and I are both exactly on ECR here. We have two guys that we're going to discuss that we're different on. Rhamondre is at 19. I'm at 15. You're at 20. Joe Mixon is at 20. I'm at 24. You're at 17. Then we have Derrick Henry coming in at 21, 22 for David Montgomery, 23 for Pollard, another guy that we're different on. I'm at 16, you're at 25. Najee's at 24. We're both a little higher. And Alvin Kamara is at 25. That is tier 4. You and I are both higher than 25 on him. So let's start with, let's get to Rumble in here. Let's go to Rhamondre first, Fitzy. Why low on Rhamondre? And it's only by a spot for you, by the way. I'm actually a little higher, but I'll let you start.
I like him a lot. I mean, I like that he is the big back with really nimble feet. I appreciate his game. I appreciate that he has the broad skill set where he can catch passes too. Although I wonder if he's going to be used in that role now that they've acquired Antonio Gibson. Maybe Rhamondre is not really a 3-down back anymore, and they give Gibson the passing downs. What scares me a little, Boggs, the New England offense is still really a work in progress. They're breaking in a new quarterback. The offensive line is still pretty much hot garbage. And right now, Rhamondre is like in the prime of his career. I worry that by the time that supporting cast is up to snuff, that he will be in the late prime of his career to maybe past prime. Because those windows are small for running backs, Boggs. We know that the peak years for a running back come and go in a blink of an eye. I just worry that it's going to be a while before New England gets the offense fixed.
And look, I will fully admit that is a possibility, right? If we're talking about the realm of possibilities, them not getting right for a while, they try to force Drake May in there too fast. It doesn't work. They ruin his confidence. That could all happen. For me, what I see is an offense that is going to have to rely on the run game, because I think they're really handling Drake May with kid gloves to start the season. I don't know how long that's going to be. I don't know how long he's going to be held off. I would say probably not long. I think he'll be starting by week 6. But even if he is starting by week 6, you have to rely on the run game, especially with a team. This team still has a good defense, right? So if you have a good defense and your offense isn't quite up to snuff, you want to run the ball. You want to control the clock. You want to run downhill. And there's no one on the team that is taking goal line touches away from Rhamondre either. So I think he's safe in goal line touches. I think this is an offense that needs to rely on the run game a little bit more because they don't have an established quarterback or really an established passing game at all. So I just think he's going to be used heavily. So, and I like him, but mine is more about usage and less about the player. So I think Rhamondre could still get some work here. We are also different on Joe Mixon, where I have him at 24, you have him at 17. And by the way, we're still RB2 on Joe Mixon. And I think this year specifically, I really like Joe Mixon mixing it in here with Houston because this offense looks so good. I mean, you add Stephon Diggs, Nico Collins, you get Tank Dell back. They improve the offensive line a little bit. You have another good weapon in Schultz. Like, there's so much going on. I feel like it's going to operate a lot like the Cincinnati offense, where Joe Mixon succeeds because everybody's playing for the pass and he's got a little more wiggle room up front. So I really like him this year, but they still really like Dameon Pierce. And from what we've heard, I think their goal is to split those guys. I don't think it'll happen. I think Mixon is just so much better still than Dameon Pierce. But if it gets close at the end of the year, I can see them leaning towards Pierce. So it's really kind of the Texans' love of Pierce that keeps me just a touch lower on Mixon, I feel like.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just trying to keep this myopic short-term view. I'm trying to take the Scott Bogman view here, where I'm looking at the 2-year window, basically, and to hell with everything after 2025. I just feel like Mixon is positioned in what now appears to be a really, really strong offense to be the featured back and a very valuable short-term asset.
I don't think I need to expand on my Tony Pollard love too much, right? We talked about after his injury, he came back and he looked so much better. The Titans made him a priority free agent signing. They really wanted to get him in. And I'm just not the biggest Tyjae guy. In terms of skill, I love Tyjae, but the injury, his size, they I don't know. I don't have the longest love outlook for Tyjae's career. And you've compared him to Jay Ajayi a bunch. So, for me, they paid Tony. They want him here. I think he's being underrated because of the injury from last season. All of that adds up to Tony Pollard being a buy for me. Your thoughts on Pollard, since you do have him as, what do you have him at, 25? Is that right? So he is like your first RB3, but he's not an RB2 for you. So
yeah, and maybe he gets back to the sort of usage he had in Dallas, where he was it wasn't like he was a backup to Zeke when Tony Pollard was putting together those really nice years and being hyper efficient. He was sort of a 1B to Zeke's 1A. And maybe like being in a duo, again, is good for him, because it shouldn't have been a total shock that his hyper efficiency didn't travel into a more of a heavy duty role. So I think it's kind of understandable, just like we saw with Kenyon Drake back in the day, Boggs, when everyone wanted Kenyon Drake to get a lot more work, and then he got it, and it was like, ugh. All right. So, I do like Tony Pollard. It's just, the other thing is, I don't know what this Tennessee offense is going to look like.
That's true.
They have brought in this huge influx of talent, but it's all still going to be predicated on whether or not Will Levis can play. And I don't think we know definitively whether or not Will Levis can play.
That's fair. Yeah. And that is more than fair. Right. So, and Will Levis wasn't brought in by this regime. So, the leash could be a little bit shorter, but if it is, what do? You run the ball a ton. So then it might just be, the guy is just getting an insane amount of volume. So we'll see.
I will say, Bog, like, props to the Titans for surrounding their young quarterback with skill position talent. Because, my gosh, if Levis fails this year, he's going to have no excuses. But the thing is, if he does fail this year, everyone who's investing in Calvin Ridley, DeAndre Hopkins, Tony Pollard, Tyjae Spears, they're going to be really disappointed.
Yeah, and by the way, one off season for the Titans, they had so much talent. What the hell took the Giants forever to add anything? And they still don't have as much as the Titans do around Daniel Jones and that team. So we're both lower than consensus on DeAndre Swift and David Montgomery. I don't think, like David Montgomery, we already talked about with Jahmyr Gibbs. We just expect him to get fewer and fewer touches as the years go on. Jahmyr Gibbs is going to hit his stride as Montgomery's aging. So that one's kind of an obvious one. But with DeAndre Swift, I mean, they don't need to hear it from us again, probably. For me, I think DeAndre Swift is so overrated. I think that most of what he did last year was because he was behind one of the better offensive lines in the NFL in Philly, which is why I'm excited about Saquon this year. But I don't really like Swift in Chicago, not because I don't like Swift. He's fine. He's still going to be the lead back, but I like Roshan. I think Khalil Herbert's not that much worse than DeAndre Swift, right? So I don't know. They paid him, so he's their guy, but I am not investing in Swift in the Dynasty League at all.
Yeah, I mean, I share some of your trepidation. I think he should be a part-timer. I think he could be a perfectly fine committee back. Boggs. The one thing that kind of keeps me interested, and maybe this is a weird thing to hang my hat on, but like when the free agent tampering period began or whatever, 11 a.m. local our time, they announced that signing at 11:01. Like that was one of the very first signings of free agency to be announced. Like the Bears had zeroed in on this dude. And by that time, you would imagine the Bears front office had already decided they were going to, go after Caleb Williams. So like they were cooking up some big plans for this offense. And like DeAndre Swift was prominently involved in those plans.
Yeah, well, I think it's a smart thing to do. You see the Titans doing it as well, as surround your young quarterback with all of the talent. So he doesn't have those excuses of there's no talent around him. You don't have the Kenny Pickett. You don't have the Daniel Jones scenario here. He is either going to succeed and be your next guy, or he is going to fail miserably. So, we'll see what happens with Caleb, but I am just not a DeAndre Swift fan at all. We're both higher on Najee and Alvin Kamara. Not a shock at all that I'm higher on Najee. I think I have been since he came in the league. Sure, I'm a little bit of a homer. I understand that, but you were going to talk about it later, and I've just constantly said this offseason. Najee is the one. Warren is the two. Warren has a limited amount of touches. Najee doesn't. Najee could take 40 touches. I mean, he could. He is a beast. So I think that is the difference maker for me. It's Arthur Smith. The quarterback situation is still very questionable. They invested in 3 offensive linemen in the NFL draft. Tomlin said, we want to roll people. And I think that's what we're going to get is a lot of carries from both these guys. So it makes me very high on Najee. And Alvin Kamara, nothing changed. He hasn't really shown too many signs of aging. He's still pretty good, but the shoe could drop at any point. So we're not crazy ahead of ECR, but we're both just a little bit higher and respect what he's done in the past. So your thoughts on Najee and Kamara?
Yeah, just quick thoughts. Najee has been a battle tank. He has not missed a game in 3 years. And like you said, if you want to give that dude 25, 30 touches a game, like he'll just take a licking and keep on ticking, man. He's the Timex watch. And yeah, like I know he's kind of thought of now as a plotter, but he had a really high explosive run rate last year. It was mostly like 12 and 15 yard carries, which count as explosive runs and not, the 40 or 50 yard varieties.
He doesn't have the breakaway speed.
He's not Devon Achane. You will not be mistaken for Devon Achane. But like, Najee, I think was starting to get a bad rap last year. Like he was, because man, if you
there were a couple runs where he was just terrible.
Early last year was rough. Yep. I mean, he turned it around at some point, and now we got the Arthur Smith thing to worry about. But let's not turn this into a depressing show, Boggs. Kamara, like I'm mostly just excited again. Like Joe Mixon, I'm trying to be very near-term focused with Kamara, and you've got Captain Checkdown Derek Carr at quarterback, and not a lot of wide receiver talent beyond Chris Olave in New Orleans. Like this could set up for another, what was it? The first 3 years of his career where Kamara had like 81 receptions every year.
Yes.
This could very well set up as like another 81 reception type of season for Alvin Kamara.
Yeah, it really could. Anything else on the guys from this tier that we didn't discuss? Benson, Javonte, Derrick Henry, anything else there?
I'm starting to warm, and speaking of Worm's not here to hear this, but I'm starting to warm to Derrick Henry and redraft. But Dynasty, I just can only get so excited about a running back who's about.
I'm only on ECR consensus. Yeah. I'm not above with Derrick Henry. So if that's the case, you expect this year anything over that. You can't really count on. All right, we have 2 more tiers to go through, but before we do there, let me tell you guys about the Cheat Sheet Creator, and you can create the perfect rankings for your league with the Cheat Sheet Creator. Add tiers and sync your league to create custom rankings based on your league settings. All you got to do is visit fantasypros.com/draftwizard or use the Cheat Sheet Creator on the Fantasy Football Draft Wizard app to dominate your draft. This is a great feature. It makes it so easy. I love using this Cheat Sheet Creator because it just helps me out so much. I love having a physical list in my hand. I'll even sometimes make notes and be like, don't forget this guy. Don't forget this guy, and stick it on my computer. So we're getting late. I won't forget this guy. You know how memory goes. It's selective, especially for me. So let's go to tier 5. that goes 26 to 36. We start out with Tyjae Spears at 26. We're both lower than consensus. Also both lower than consensus on 27. Zamir White. Brian Robinson is at 28. 29 is Aaron Jones. 30 is Jaylen Warren. 31 is Blake Corum. 32 Zach Charbonnet. 33 Nick Chubb. 34 MarShawan Lloyd. 35 James Conner. And 36 is Jaylen Wright. We have a bunch of differences in this spot here. So let's go reverse here. Let's talk about first some of the guys that we're both lower than consensus on. And we have three guys here. It's Tyjae, it's Zamir White, and it's surprisingly Aaron Jones. We've already talked about Tyjae. Zamir White, to me, it's all about proving it and being the guy this year. You establish yourself, I'll raise you way up. I don't know yet, right? I'm just not 100% sold on Zamir. So to me, that's why I have him as an RB4, where he's usually going as an RB3. You have him a little bit lower as well. And then Aaron Jones, we're both not that crazy. CCR is 29. We both have him at 32. I still think he's going to be a number one back, but they've talked about Ty Chandler being a potential B back to Aaron Jones A, and they don't run the ball anyway in Minnesota. So I'm just worried about him in terms of that. So your thoughts on Spears, White, and Aaron Jones, Fitzy?
I like Spears. I think he's really talented, but we've talked about our concerns about his knee and what sort of long-term outlook he has. Zamir White looked really good when he got heavy carries late last season, but I don't think he's ever going to be a prolific pass catcher. Dynasty leagues are typically PPR leagues. I think he's going to be capped in that regard, so I don't know if he has like true RB1 upside. And like, let's see him do it over a prolonged period of time. Like, I just worry that Zamir White is in a way maybe setting up to be this year's Mike Davis. Boggs. Not a perfect example because Zamir White is young and Mike Davis was this journeyman who was thrust into a starting job. But I just worry that maybe he's being over-regarded. I'm just being cautious with Zamir White, I guess. And who's our other guy who Aaron Jones. Yeah, so, I mean, he's just older. He didn't get fully healthy until the playoffs last year, and then he was phenomenal in the playoffs for the Packers. Like, Aaron Jones is great. I think he's actually underappreciated.
I do too.
But, like, he is approaching the twilight of his career. So we're not too far off ECR. For me, it's an age thing. For you, maybe the change in ecosystem. And
it's the offense, the fact that they will straight up abandon the run in some games. Kevin O'Connell will. So maybe they balance it more. Maybe that was the point of going to get Aaron Jones. But I think
he is better than Alexander Madison.
Oh, yes. Most people are. But yeah, I mean, for me, they just abandon the run game sometimes. So it's not even that Aaron Jones has lost skill, because he hasn't. To me, it's more about the fact that, he's going to have big games and then probably low games, because when they're behind, they will absolutely trash the run and just pass. So we're both higher on only one player here, and Zach Charbonnet. How the hell are we both going to be ahead of ECR on both these running backs for Seattle? Fitzy, I mean, we both love Charbonnet, but I'll let you talk first.
Boggs, I don't think I can reconcile the ranking of Zach Charbonnet with my love for Kenneth Walker. Like, that's the thing. Charbonnet was a really good prospect. And This dude is this downhill runner with pass catching ability. Like, we really like him. Didn't get his shot last year, only because Kenneth Walker is so good. But, I'm still optimistic that Charbonnet is going to wind up in a place eventually where he gets a lot more work. Or maybe Kenneth Walker gets banged up or something and Charbonnet gets his moment in the sun this year. But, like, he's really good. And I know Thor Nystrom loved him coming out of school and had him ranked ahead of Jahmyr Gibbs in their respective class. So, like, I like the player a lot. I like both Seattle backs. And even though I realize this is definitely a case where I'm not looking only 2 years in the future, Boggs, I'm looking at the bigger picture with Charbonnet and thinking eventually he gets a shot to be the man somewhere.
All right. So on the differences that we have here, I'll let you talk about the three guys that you're higher than consensus on. And it's not, you're not crushing consensus on these guys really at all. Warren, you have 3 spots ahead of consensus. I have him 3 behind. Corum, you have him 2 spots. I have him 3 behind. And then MarShawan Lloyd, you have him 1 spot. I'm significantly lower on MarShawan Lloyd. I'll get to that when you get there, but talk about those guys in order and why you like them.
Yeah, as with Seattle, I think Pittsburgh has 2 good backs, and Jaylen Warren is pretty versatile, like can be productive in the running game, can be productive as a pass catcher. It's going to be interesting to see how our friend Arthur Smith deploys those 2 backs, probably in a maddening and unpredictable fashion this year.
Yeah.
But yes, so like I believe in the talent with Jaylen Warren. And the advanced stats sort of bear that out. Like he's pretty efficient runner. Blake Corum, I thought, was the best pure runner in this class. Not the most athletic. I mean, he does not have the size or athleticism that Jonathan Brooks and Trey Benson have. But I thought just in terms of vision, footwork, contact balance, he was number 1 for me. And like I do think he's probably going to have some sort of role this year, which is part of the reason I'm not quite as high as you are on Kyren. And MarShawan Lloyd, maybe Derek Brown has just won me over with his. He's been banging the drum for MarShawan Lloyd like John Bonham all off season. So and then he goes to my Packers, and I think like maybe it's premature of me to think that Matt LaFleur is a committee back guy, but his history has been kind of a committee back guy.
Yeah, I'm not that much lower. You guys heard my piece on Warren. I think he's capped in touches and Najee's there. Corum, I'm just a couple spots below. I don't feel low on Corum at all. I still have him as a low end RB3, which is where he's going. So he's in that range for me. I am lower on Lloyd, and it has nothing to do with skill. I think Lloyd's a great runner. It's just the extensive injury history. And Josh Jacobs is a guy that can take the ball 300 times. You and I both don't expect him to do that in Green Bay, right? But if he just shows to be so much better than Lloyd, he can. And it wouldn't be a crazy notion to have him take 300 carries again, because we've seen him do it before, and he's a really good running back. So for those reasons, I'm lower just overall on Lloyd. He's the only one I really didn't like, though. The guys that I'm higher than, 2 of them you guys will not be shocked at all. It's Nick Chubb and James Conner. And I was actually kind of surprised that I was higher on Nick Chubb. And this is just, I'm not ready to be all the way done. I'm not aiming to pick Nick Chubb, right? He's not a target for me, even though my ranking says he is. He's not. But I mean, last year, this guy was a top 10 running back, right? He had a major knee injury. We have no idea if he's going to be the same. The Browns have prepared just in case he doesn't look the same. But if he does, we might be writing him off a little too quickly, which is why I'm higher on ECR on Nick Chubb. James Conner is just still going to be the number 1 this season. I think he's going to go and play a couple more seasons after this year as well. Trey Benson will take over in Arizona. I think Conner will find a role somewhere else. So I'm still high on him. And he is also a guy that I feel like every time I've written him off, he has proven me wrong. So I don't want to be low on Conner. And then Jaylen Wright is like one of the few young guys that I'm higher on than anybody else. I feel like how I feel about Jaylen Wright is how everybody at Fantasy Pros feels about MarShawan Lloyd. Right? That's how I feel about Jaylen Wright. I think he eventually replaces Mostert. This year could be bad, though, and I will fully accept that. Like, Etienne is still there. Mostert is coming off all of those touchdowns, and if it ain't broke, don't fix it in terms of the way that offense runs. But, I mean, if McDonald likes you, there's something to it. So I am very excited about Wright's future here. Let's go to tier 6, the last one we'll break down all the way through. At number 37, we're both lower than consensus on Devin Singletary. 38 is Austin Ekeler. I'm high, you're low. On 39 is Zach Moss. We're both below consensus significantly there. Kendre Miller, we're a little different. You're higher, I'm lower. He's number 40. Chase Brown comes in at 41. Then Mostert, Ford, Ray Davis, Roshan Johnson, Gus Edwards, Chuba Hubbard and Kimani Vidal. You've done enough, Fitz, to get Vidal up to an RB4 in the rankings, coming in at number 48. If you want to hear the top 50 in the next tier, it's Tyler Algier and then Khalil Herbert to round out our top 50. So tell me about some of the guys in this group that you are higher than consensus on, and give us a used car salesman pitch on some of these guys.
Yeah, Kendre Miller. Don't know that he's going to be good, but there's reason to believe. I kind of liked him as a prospect, and I think Jamal Williams looked pretty washed last year. So I think maybe this is the year Kendre Miller gets a chance to be sort of that guy who shares the early download a little bit with Kamara. And I'm kind of intrigued. Still has his career ahead of him. I guess other guys, Ray Davis. I like him a lot. He was one of my favorite running back prospects in this class, as was Kimani Vidal. I've got them back to back. Vidal, 6th round pick. The draft capital wasn't really there, but he went to the dream landing spot with the Chargers, who want to run the ball and have, Gus Edwards, who's very one-dimensional in front of him, and J.K. Dobbins, who I don't know if he'll ever be the same again after the torn Achilles, on top of some major knee problems. So I think Vidal's going to have an opportunity. The one other guy I have to mention, Chase Brown. Like, it would not surprise me, Boggs, if Chase Brown became the new Joe Mixon for the Bengals. I just think he's a lot better than Zach Moss. Moss never lived up to expectations in Buffalo. Was great early last season when he got to play with Anthony Richardson and benefit from that mobile quarterback thing that, like Alfred Morris benefited from with RG3 way back in the day. Then from week 6 on, Zach Moss averaged 3.6 yards per carry. Chase Brown is faster and more explosive. He's a better pass catcher. And, he was an absolute workhorse at the University of Illinois.
Yeah, for me, I have Zach Moss way down as an RB6. Like, I'm just not interested, right? Maybe this year, Chase Brown folds like origami and Zach Moss becomes a guy by default. Like that. Is it in the realm of possibility? Sure. You and I are both probably a little too high on Chase Brown because we both watched him so much. I bet on him so many times because he had 30 carries every game for Illinois. Like, we know we can handle a heavy workload, and Zach Moss is constantly hurt. He's been hurt, ever since college, ever since his really bad leg injury at Utah. He has had injury issues. So I'm just not, the skill has always been there for him, but he can't stay on the field. Availability is the best ability. All those coaching tropes. I'm not going to be high on Moss at all. The guys that I'm high on in this tier are Ekeler. And honestly, do I think Ekeler is the guy who was the number 1 running back 2 years ago? Absolutely not. No, I don't. But he's with his run game coordinator. Anthony Lynn is run game coordinator for Washington, and he is the guy that put Austin Ekeler in those spots to succeed. Now, Cliff Kingsbury's offense is pass heavy, but it produced a couple of RB1 seasons with James Conner. Is that going to be Brian Robinson, though? Because I think it's Brian Robinson. I don't think it's Ekeler, but I do think Ekeler is smart enough to transition to a role in the NFL to keep getting that NFL paycheck of a pass-catching back. I think that's what he wants to extend his career. He's a smart guy. He's on the microphone all the time. I think that is what we're going to see with Ekeler. So I'm not counting him all the way out. Like, I feel like some people are in their rankings. Some people that have him like in the 40s over there. I don't know who would do that kind of crazy stuff. But I'm also high on Mostert by 2 spots. I mean, I'm at 40. His ECR is at 42. He's coming off a huge year. Could still be enormous for you this season. He could be one of those season makers. So I'll give him a little credit. I'm not crazy high on him. And the other guy is Ford, who, in terms of a runner, I don't think is special. I really don't think Jerome Ford is a special back, but I do think Stefanski loves to run the football. Jerome Ford did it last season, and Nick Chubb is kind of questionable. Obviously, I'm higher on Chubb too. This is kind of like you and I reckoning being high on both guys in Seattle. I'm high on both guys in Cleveland, but I think they're going to run the ball a lot. And I think that Jerome Ford proved to Stefanski he can be the guy if Chubb can't do it. So I think he's still going to have a role. They, went out and signed Deontay Foreman too, so there is competition for him. But low end RB3, I think, is fine. Is there anybody else in this tier that you wanted to talk about, Fitz?
No, I think that's it, Bugs. I mean, I think I do need to move Jerome Ford up. I like your take on that with Stefanski being run heavy, and I'm kind of pessimistic on the recovery for Nick Chubb. And Ekeler, I just feel like the cheese has gone bad, Bugs. And like, we also know, like, the pass catching back paired with the mobile quarterback. We know mobile quarterbacks don't dump it off because it's just like, I'm just going to run it myself and get those 8 yards. And I just, like, someone just put up some video on Twitter of Ekeler last year, and I think it was against the Packers, and he had this wide run, and like Quay Walker tracked him down from behind like he was standing still.
Well, Quay Walker's really fast.
Quay Walker is fast, but Ekeler looked so slow on this play, man.
So get him in space, dump the ball off to him. We'll see. Yeah. I mean, maybe it won't work. So I'm not like, when I ranked Ekeler, I wasn't thinking, oh, I still like Ekeler. I was like, he's got to be down here now. And then I saw that I was way higher than consensus, and I was just a little surprised. So still an RB3 and a low end one at that. Beyond the top 50 here, Fitzy, anyone that you're high on that you want to talk up? I mean, we're both kind of high on like Tyrone Tracy. We're both high on Jaleel McLaughlin, who Cecil Lammey. I don't know if you saw this, Fitz, but Cecil Lammey today came out and said, Jaleel McLaughlin looks so good. I don't know if Javonte Williams makes the team. Now, I think that is a super hot take because they brought in Audric Estime. They like him, but Cecil has been around the Broncos forever, right? So you have to listen when he says something like that.
Yeah, shout out to Cecil, who once bought me a beer at a bar and on Blake Street in Denver. And reports out of the Broncos mini camp were glowing with regard to Jaleel McLaughlin. And Cecil bringing up the possibility of Javonte maybe being released was really, really an eye-opener. Our own Derek Brown is high on McLaughlin.
Oh my. Yeah.
Yeah. And I know he's an undrafted dude and didn't really get a lot of run last year, but as far as the efficiency numbers among qualifying backs, and I know he just barely had enough work to qualify, he was way up there in yards per contact after carry, just yards per route run even. He was good in the passing game. So I think it's worth keeping an eye on that situation for sure.
Probably the best deal that we've talked about today. His ECR is 61. I am at 47. You have him at 48. So we both have him as RB 4s, and that could easily move up with more positive reports on Jaleel McLaughlin here. Braylon Allen, your boy, getting a lot of positive reports there. I'm higher on Tank Bigsby because they keep talking him up. I think Bucky Irving already has a role in Tampa Bay, so he's in my top 50. Who else? You have Algier in your top 50, McLaughlin. I think that's it from this crew. So anybody else you want to talk about before we go, Fitz?
I know Braylon Allen's landing spot was a nightmare, Boggs, going to the Jets behind Breece Hall and having to contend with some other young running backs, Isaiah Davis,
Isiah.
Yeah, exactly. But Braylon Allen will not turn 21 until January. Play the waiting game with it, especially if you're in a league where you've got 28, 30, 32 man rosters. Just park this guy on your bench and wait. Just be patient. Because despite being the youngest player in the entire draft, I think he has more 100-yard rushing games than any running back in the class of 2024.
Yeah, I still... So I'm higher on him than I was, obviously, with all these glowing reports. I still think he's a touch slow.
And he's no Jonathan Taylor, Boggs. Trust me, as a Wisconsin fan, I'm not trying to oversell the talent of Braylon Allen, but I do think there's some talent there, and this guy is obviously this big dude, man.
Yeah, and Breece Hall's one of those guys where it's just hard to take him off the field, right? But like you said, he's so young. If he doesn't make it in New York, he's definitely getting a shot somewhere else unless he just looks miserable. So yeah, I think he's a good buy as a young player too. But that is going to wrap it up for us. We appreciate you all paying attention to these top 50 running backs, and we have a little disagreement, but we can disagree like gentlemen and not disrespect each other until after the mics are off, at least, of course. So, but that'll be it for us. We will see you guys next week. Worm will be back next week, so we'll be the full complement as normal. So remember to follow us on the Twitter at Bogman Sports for myself, at Fitz_FF, and we'll see you guys then. Take it easy, everybody.